Welcome again. We have another Web3 phase here with us today. We're today coming out of Istanbul in Turkey, and I have the enormous honor to have Friederike Ernst with me, who is co-founder at Gnosis and also show host of my personal favorite crypto podcast, Epicenter. Friederike, thank you so much for joining us, and maybe introduce yourself, your background, and maybe tell us a little bit, how did you get into crypto? What did you do before?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for having me, first of all. How did I get into crypto and what I did? That's a good question. So by training, I'm actually a physicist. I did research in low-dimensional complex quantum systems. I did a PhD and I did a couple of postdocs. And I left academia to co-found Gnosis in the beginning of 2017. So that's like 100 years ago in blockchain terms. And how did I get to that? I had known for crypto for a while. And in the beginning, I was convinced it was a scam. Like in 2012 or so, I thought, this Bitcoin thing, such a scam. And I kept thinking about what exactly the scammy part of it was. And I think, like many people, it led me to kind of question what money is, mm-hmm. or whether maybe money is as money does. And that's how I fell down the rabbit hole.
Okay. Now, since, many people, maybe some of the listeners also make some career choices, what is it that drove you out of academia and that supposedly until now kept you in crypto by contrast?
I love physics. I think physics is enormously cool, and kind of finding things out gives me incredible pleasure. So kind of just coming up with hypotheses and kind of testing them and devising the experimental setup and looking at the data, analyzing the data, kind of interpreting the data. All of that, I love it. And I left because I felt the overall, so basically the individual researchers' incentives were not aligned with the incentives of science as a whole. So basically, the environment was not conducive to actually working in the most efficient way possible. You kind of had to do a lot of extra loops and so on. It was a little bit like a game where kind of you had to check like boxes. I was okay at the game, but I didn't like that was how the game was. And so I thought about what I do if not for physics. And then it turns out there's lots of things I don't actually want to do. So I don't like doing things where I feel that there's no societal good in doing them, and that also you don't have a lot of decision-making power over how to do things. And so I decided that I would probably be a very good employee, but not a particularly happy one. And crypto, all physicists can code. And I had taken some interest in cryptography relatively early. So there was this book called The Code Book by Simon Singh, probably around 2000 or something. I read it when I was still in school, and I set up my emails with PGP when I was 14. And
you are an email OG.
I am an email OG. I really enjoyed cryptography. So I think for me, it was just a right place, right time sort of situation. So I like the style of working. I could use the tools. I think I could actually see myself doing many, many other things. So I don't think this was, be this or be forever unhappy. I think I'm generally a super optimistic and happy person, so I can kind of take find passion for almost anything. But I think this is how I ended up in crypto.
That's interesting. I think a lot of people, myself included, can resonate with what you said about academic research, the way to go. Now, then you were co-founding Gnosis, and from my recollection, Gnosis was one of the earliest projects on Ethereum in that whole space, around DEF CON 1 times, which is like ages ago in 2015. Gnosis was an idea that was already, I think, a bit more than an idea, like super early on. Tell us maybe a little bit on how it started and some of the amazing things that came out of Gnosis, because Gnosis, to many people, might not even know what the origin of Gnosis was, and at this point there's just so much that came out of that.
Yeah,
tell us a bit about what all happened there.
Yeah, we've built so much stuff over the years. So originally Gnosis kind of started as a prediction market startup. Basically, we were going to build a platform for prediction markets. I don't know whether any of the listeners still remember this, but
Probably not.
In 2015 or 2016, the thing that people were the most excited about in the crypto space was prediction markets. And it sounds fake now, but I swear it was true. There was like a CoinDesk survey where people could kind of state what they were most excited about, and like 70% put prediction markets, which in hindsight seems funny, but back then kind of it seemed very sensible. And it turned out that there was a lot of infrastructure missing. Because Ethereum was new. So we kind of built infrastructure with kind of our core values in mind, not always explicitly, but basically things that we felt about strongly were self-sovereignty, agency, and fairness. And I think those are kind of the things that, that go through the entire Gnosis offering, like this, piece of red thread. So we've built a lot of things over the years. So starting with the Gnosis Safe, which actually started as a multi-sig that we built to keep our own token sale proceeds, which by then we had, before the token sale, we built this, right?
Yeah.
So, we kind of looked at the existing multi-sigs and decided that we didn't think they were secure enough, so we built our own, and it developed into this, huge ecosystem around the Safe and Safe apps and so on, kind of like a little bit like browser to Web3. To a certain extent. And then we build a series of exchanges, because obviously not only do you have outcome tokens when you build prediction markets, you also need to trade them, right?
So the idea to get into exchanges was kind of like a necessity to make prediction markets happen.
Yeah. So
that's something interesting that I didn't know. Okay, so in order to have, maybe give us like a super quick recap, what is a prediction market? Because I know when I heard this term the first time I was very confused.
Yeah, so basically a prediction market is a very simple financial instrument that kind of pays out under a certain condition, or it doesn't. So basically it looks at a condition at a certain point in time, and if that condition is true, it pays you out $1, and if it's not true, it pays you out nothing. And so basically these rights, these outcome tokens, we call them, they trade prior to the deadline of the event that they're about. And basically the value at which they trade gives you the probability that the market assigns to that outcome becoming true, right? So basically say, if I have an outcome token that, has DEF CON, the next DEF CON been announced yet with a location?
I think not.
Okay, so basically, let's say, DEF CON is happening next year, this much is known, and the location is as of yet unknown. So basically, let's say, for instance, I will set up a prediction market. Will DEF CON happen in Saigon? Okay, and it's very clear, either this happens or it doesn't happen. And if it happens in Saigon, that token will give me the claim to $1. And if it doesn't happen, it gives me nothing. So basically, if people now think Saigon has like a 25% chance of becoming the next DEFCON location, it should trade at 25 cents on the dollar, right? And that's what a prediction market is. Obviously, you kind of need to trade the outcome tokens, right? And at the time, there were centralized exchanges, obviously. DEX was kind of, it was a new idea. It seemed crazy. And then there were kind of like order book DEXs.
Which year are we talking about right now, like just to give us a rough feeling?
So we started on the exchanges, I think, already in 2017. So we're talking like Ether Delta times.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an order book-based exchange. And this doesn't work for long tail tokens because order books are thin, right? So what we actually did, we actually came up with, it's difficult to say who actually came up with it because it was kind of an idea that was kind of up in the air and so on. But we built the first automated market maker for trading outcome tokens. And then
I think this is just important also to highlight, like, I think many times it seems that Uniswap invented this X times Y equals K, but yeah, so the story that I was told is that, yeah, then, you know, many people think Vitalik was writing about it, which is also correct, but actually that you guys were actually the first ones to actually conceptualize that idea.
Yeah, so it's also been attributed to Martin and Alan Liu, but the person who actually came up with it, I think, was Robin Hanson, the somewhat controversial Twitter figure that many of you. He's a professor of economics at George Mason University. Yeah, he also came up with the concept of prediction markets. So
okay, two things I learned.
So it was something that was definitely in the air. But yeah, so basically we decided that we needed to build a DEX that would work for long tail tokens. And seeing that this was 2017, 2018, this was a very tall ask. And so what we actually came up with is we reused the code for our token sale, which was a reverse Dutch auction, and just decided to kind of just do day-long auctions for these tokens. Yeah, so basically this is how the entire batch auction thing started. And that kind of evolved over several iterations into what is now CowSwap. So basically, if you want to trade without being a victim of MEV, we all know to do that on CowSwap, but that's kind of the origin story of CowSwap. And then we built DAO tooling together with DAOstack back in the day. So the DXDAO was the first, okay, claiming the first is always a bit difficult, but it was a very early instance of a DAO with actual voting and so on. So obviously kind of other DAO models won out in the end, so kind of the compound style DAO. But the DXDAO token model, or basically the DAOstack way of kind of dealing with the attention problem, I think this would actually be super needed today because kind of it does actually make governance a lot better. Yeah, and then we merged, so we also built prediction markets. I probably should have led with this. So it's still out there, it's called Omen. It lives on Gnosis Chain. Back then it was called XDAI Chain because 2 years ago we merged with XDAI. And XDAI became Gnosis Chain, and we have kind of made sure that Gnosis Chain became decentralized. So when XDAI Chain became Gnosis Chain, there were 20 validators, and now there's 130,000. There are several clients. We went through our own merge. It's kind of like, yeah, so it's come a long way, and Gnosis Chain is still the home of lots of projects that you guys may know. So projects like POAP, Circles UBI, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, many of these products we at HOPR are like heavy users, right? Like the Safe, obviously, not just for managing our own assets, but also integrating it more deeply in our infrastructure. CowSwap is what we recommend as the de facto standard trading venue, and Gnosis Chain, obviously. So how did you come up with, getting down this route of building an L1? Because you could say these days it's a kind of controversial thing, right? Like this is the time of L2s. Like L2s are supposedly the thing that scales Ethereum and not L1s. So how did you come up with this decision to kind of swim against the stream of popular opinion, what is currently, the way to go?
I think the decision how to make Ethereum scale, this was taken in a different time almost. So basically this was a decision that was kind of made 3-4 years ago. And at that time, people didn't anticipate how soon trustless bridges would be around. So bridging was a huge issue. And secondly, people didn't foresee how difficult it would be to decentralize sequences. So I think, you know how sometimes kind of no one really makes a decision, but somehow collectively you still move in one direction and that seems to be the right direction. Yeah. So when we sat down and kind of looked at the space and said, okay, the bridges, this is not going to be a problem for much longer. And
little did you know.
Yeah, the bridges, that's going to be solved. And everything ultimately settling back to Ethereum. This is not how layer 2s were devised, right? So basically layer 2s were also devised in a time, basically in the initial idea of an L2. The L2 was meant to be a liminal space. It's also in the name. It's a roll-up. So basically you took like 100 transactions, you kind of roll them together, and then you settle them all together to L1. But basically now these L2s have become like these forever homes, right? So basically you're born on an L2 and you die on the L2 and you never exit the L2. And a lot of the security assumptions that you kind of get from being an L2 don't actually come into play if you never plan to leave it, if you never plan to settle on an L1. So basically, L2s are fantastic for assets that are issued on the L1, and then kind of you have trading back and forth on the L2, and then you settle again to the L1. That is what kind of L2s were initially devised for. What they're now being used for is kind of issuance of tokens, for instance. And there, for a token that is natively issued on L2, settling back to L1, this does you no good at all. So the only thing it does is drive up the cost, because with an L2, kind of you have to periodically post transaction to L1. So basically, obviously it'll be cheaper than the L1, but transaction costs will rise in lockstep with the L1 transaction costs. And if we see Ethereum kind of becoming this global settlement layer, that's going to be a lot more expensive than it is today. And fees on the L2s are going to rise in lockstep. And this is why we're now talking about L3s and L4s, right? And it's kind of all this inverted pyramid scheme. And in principle, we totally saw that even at the time when we merged with XDAI, there were a lot of other L1s where block space had kind of become commoditized. But none of them were, in our eyes, sufficiently decentralized. So our value proposition was to build an Ethereum affiliated, an Ethereum sister chain that would kind of do things very similarly to Ethereum, and be trustlessly connected, but be its own chain on itself. And basically for everything that is natively issued on Gnosis Chain, the security guarantees are almost exactly the same as they are for Ethereum. It's just the bridging where you kind of have lower security guarantees. So kind of you have an honest majority validator sync committee assumption for the bridge. But if you think that down the line most of things will not be issued on Ethereum, but will issued on affiliated chains and L2s, that's not that big a problem. And if you own and because you don't need to settle back to Ethereum, it doesn't have this lockstep fee rise with Ethereum, right? So to us, kind of this, I call it kind of the Cosmos version of Ethereum, right? So basically, in Cosmos, you have these different standalone networks that are kind of connected, and there's pockets of values in different networks and so on. And in Ethereum, you have the empire model, right? So basically, everything, down the line, everything kind of settles back on Ethereum. And we think that while this is, obviously this works to a certain extent, but we don't think it's enough. This is not going to solve the world's decentralized blockchain needs. So we set out to make a chain as decentralized as possible, but also close to Ethereum. And this is how we got here.
Now, let me challenge this view on this L1 a bit, because so my question is a little bit when I hear that, like, where does this lead us, right? So what is kind of the end game view? Like, does that mean, since Ethereum doesn't sufficiently scale, including its L2s, does that mean, that everyone should spin up their chain, and I spin up a Sebastian chain and a HOPR chain and an RPCH chain? Like, is that the way to go? No. Like, it seems to me we end up in this, disconnected, like, intranet world, right? Which is not composable and breaks a lot of things. Like, what is the way to go, and why is Gnosis kind of different here?
So I would disagree with the premise here. So I don't think everyone needs to spin up their own chain, but I think one chain is not enough, right? I mean, so basically that's a long way to kind of come from one statement to the other, right? So, I mean, I think one chain is not enough. I think there need to be several chains, and Gnosis Chain kind of aims to be kind of the first, basically in the original sharded version of Ethereum with like the smart shards, Gnosis aims to be the first smart shard. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
So this is kind of.
So that is still basically a roadmap on the roadmap of Gnosis Chain to become a smart shard of Ethereum, if and when that happens.
No, well, I mean, it's not specified out on the Ethereum side and also not on the Gnosis side, but effectively that's what it is, right? Basically, it's a chain that kind of has computation, and that is trustlessly connected to Ethereum mainnet.
Via the bridges that you mentioned.
Via the bridges that I mentioned and can also talk about later. But yeah, so basically in principle, that was the vision of Ethereum. Just basically in Ethereum, people, it was always said that people would kind of have to pick a shard, and there would be different shards that would kind of excel at different things, because obviously always, if you do something within the shard, transactions are always cheaper and faster than if you do something cross-shard. So basically that you would have to take that into account for your architecture. And it's almost the same with Gnosis and Ethereum.
Yeah, okay. And one important thing that you did mention, I think that's worth diving into, because it's so many implications, are bridges, right? So there's a bunch of bridges around. There's been tremendous drama around multiple hundreds of millions of dollars that went missing in some bridge hacks. So it's a at least complicated ecosystem. So maybe give us a brief overview of that ecosystem, and what is there hope? Like, how do we get out of that mess?
So maybe I can already give you the sneak preview here. So basically over the past year and a half, there $4 billion have been lost in bridge hacks.
Oh, wow.
And they have been the hacks have been of different flavors. Maybe let's talk about bridges first, right? So basically the very first implementation of bridges where by and large glorified multi-sigs.
Yeah.
So basically, what's difficult if you run a bridge is kind of, you don't just have to know the state of your own chain, you have to know the state of the other chain, right? So basically what would happen is people would kind of run services that kind of would, with the light client or so, that would kind of check the state of the other chain, that would check whether the bridge transaction was commensurate with both chains, and then basically the bridge transaction would happen, and there would be like, I don't know, say 5 parties on the bridge multi-sig, and then basically that was your governance. And it's easy to see how to break that, right? And then there's 2 different types of trustless bridges or trust minimized bridges. One is the optimistic kind, where basically they are not mathematically secure, they're game theoretically secure, in the sense that basically anyone can postulate that something is the correct state, and then people can challenge this for a half hour or an hour or however long, and then if no one challenges this, it goes through. So basically, and people are incentivized to challenge this because they will be rewarded if they find an actual fault. So this is, these are optimistic bridges. And then there's something that was not thinkable a couple of years ago called ZK light client bridges. And how the ZK light client bridges learn about the state of the other chain is by actually having a light client and putting it in a zero knowledge circuit. And then you don't use the privacy element of the ZK circuit, you use the succinctness element. So basically you use the property that you can verify proofs pretty cheaply. So basically you have a light client running on the other chain. So basically in principle you could have done that with a light client without a ZK circuit. It would have been prohibitively expensive, and basically it would have completely annihilated, the economics of any bridge. But because you can now put it into a ZK circuit, this makes it a lot better. Obviously, we've seen also we'll see ZK hacks in the future. So what we have actually come up with is hashi. Hashi means bridge in Japanese, and it's also called hashi. So obviously this is a fantastic name for a bridge protocol. And what it does, it's basically a multi-sig of different bridges. So you take different bridges, and only if the headers agree for all of them will the transaction go through. So basically it's kind of like additive security, but for bridges. So basically the idea is kind of the idea of putting like a sieve and a sieve and a sieve and a sieve, and then you're good. And while we know that in principle, the idea of a ZK light client bridge is a fantastic idea, obviously it's tremendously difficult to implement and to audit, as you can imagine. So kind of, I would never say this ZK light client bridge that we built, or that Succinct Labs built for Gnosis Chain, is definitely bug-free. There's probably bugs in there. But if you actually need to find bugs in several different implementations of a similar bridge, or in several different implementations of different bridges, your hack probability goes exponentially down. And this is what we think needs to happen for the foreseeable future so that we can avoid bridge hacks and in good faith ask people to bridge over funds from mainnet.
Well, unless your aggregator itself has some issue which would,
it's a super simple aggregator.
It's a super simple aggregator.
Super simple.
And the other thing that comes to mind if you say you put this analogy of a sieve and a sieve and a sieve and a sieve, is like the overall throughput or like latency might be impacted by that?
It is, but it's not majorly impacted because, it would be, there would be no overhead, obviously, if you just used a single bridge, and obviously, so in the long run, that would be, if you could be 100% certain that bridge didn't have issues, that would be preferable. But seeing now that you can't be 100% certain, and actually learning from history, like the 4 billion lost, probably should have spent some more gas on this.
Yeah. Okay, that's super interesting to see, more secure bridges to also connect like a chain like Gnosis Chain back to Ethereum or whatever other chains are out there, or L2s, I guess, right?
Yeah, so basically it works. So basically the ZK Lite client bridge needs a beacon chain. So this only works for certain chains at the moment, but the Hashi works literally to any network, and you just substitute in whichever bridges you actually have.
Okay, very cool, very, very interesting. Is that already in production use?
Yes.
Nice, great. Now I would like to circle back to a topic as kind of our last topic to talk about that you mentioned in the beginning. You mentioned how when you got into Bitcoin, you were like kind of interested in this money aspect of it, right? So there's another project that you're working on, or kind of next to Gnosis, which is Circles. Like, could you tell us about what Circles is and UBI? Because I find it a fascinating concept that I can imagine would not, or would only have difficultly been possible before blockchains.
Yeah, that is true. So basically, Circles UBI is a way of distributing universal basic income to anyone on the planet. And if, when we talked about UBI pre-blockchain, this was always a national effort, right? So basically, and it's become, I think UBI is kind of entering the Overton window right now. So basically, even 10 years ago, the notion of a UBI seemed crazy. And I know that there was a referendum in Switzerland, probably only like 5 or 6 years ago, and people in Germany were incredulous that this should be happening. There was a trial in Finland and so on. And it kind of moved from seeming super outlandish, why would anyone, ever go to work if, they were guaranteed a basic income and so on, to actually becoming very much on vogue. Andrew Yang ran on the UBI ticket a few years ago for the Democratic primary. So it's definitely hitting the mainstream. And what makes Circles super interesting is that usually you need some entity to approve people, right? So basically, if you give out a state-based UBI, the state kind of knows who its citizens are and kind of knows their names and can send them the UBI. So you've got civil resistance that way. Then there are projects even in this space that don't rely on state actors. So I'm thinking of WorldCoin, for instance. But there's still a trusted registry, and I'm using air quotes here, so a trusted registry that WorldCoin maintains of the hashes of everyone's iris.
We have to look in a literally spooky looking orb.
It looks it looks so dystopian. I don't know who actually came up with it.
I love sci-fi and I love that concept. I would never ever put my eye into one though.
Yeah, and so basically, Circles decentralizes this web of trust idea, right? So basically, what you kind of have to defend against is someone, creating 500 accounts when only they should be allowed one. So basically, you have Sebastian 1, but then you also have Sebastian 2 through 500, right? And obviously, you should only be able to get universal basic income once, not 500 times, right? And so how Circles goes about this is by giving you your own currency. So basically, you would get Sebastian Circles. I would get Friederike Circles. And what you can then do is you can trust someone. What trust means within this protocol is that you accept the other's circles as being worth as much as your own circles and saying, I'm willing to hold them, right? And then everyone's kind of incentivized to only trust people they know that exist. And that kind of forms like this giant trust graph. So if you can Google a picture of this, it's crazy. It looks like this. It looks like completely crazy network. There's like 200,000 people in there, and everyone's got their trust connections. And now what happens is, obviously I could send you circles for whatever goods or services you were willing to provide to me, because we trust each other, right? But I could also send circles to someone I don't trust directly, who's at the other edge of the network, through all the different trust connections in between. So basically, say there's a connection between you and a third guy, and then to the person I want to send something to. So you would actually end up with my circles, the next guy would end up with your circles, and the guy that you trust would end up with your circles, and the last guy would end up with the third guy's circles, right? So everyone can define which circles they're okay with holding, and this kind of propagates a flow through the network whenever someone wants to send something from one side to the other.
Now, on that side, I can see how you can establish a graph to, I'm willing to accept Friederike's circles, and I'm happy to send my Sebastian circles over to Rick and whatever. But how do we establish an exchange rate there? Because, maybe a Friederike token is much more valuable than a Sebastian circle. So, how do we establish that?
Yeah, so currently you can only trust at exactly the face value. So basically you have to accept mine for exactly the same worth as yours.
So that means 1 to 1. So one Friederike circle is always one
Yes.
Sebastian circle. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that means also if Friederike is probably in the system much longer than Sebastian, like she's a whale, whereas Sebastian only has a handful of his, isn't that leading to a system which is again very unfair, which is at odds with the values that you're having?
Yeah, so basically there's mechanisms that kind of disincentivize hoarding. Everyone's given one time circle per hour. So that's kind of don't let me do the maths, 7,000 circles or something a year. But you're also there's also 7% inflation. So basically, all circles kind of all balances go down by 7% per year to kind of disincentivize people from just hoarding it. And basically, if you did this thought experiment, Friederike, she's never spends anything, not a single one of her circles, but she also doesn't make any money, doesn't take any other circles other than the UBI in, then basically there comes a point where the 7% deflation on my total circle sum is exactly equal to the UBI that I'm given year on year on year. So basically it kind of tops out at a
So your balance stays. It's not that your balance goes down, but it stays at one level.
Yeah. And this is, the only way to kind of get above that is by earning circles, by providing goods and services to other people.
But then the inflation actually kicks in negatively and it goes down again if I just hoard them.
Yeah, it always kicks in negatively. So basically, it just happens automatically every year that that there's 7% inflation, and so people are disincentivized from hoarding circles because. So basically, if you look at what money does, basically there's 3 hallmark properties that kind of economists look at, right? So basically, 1 is a store of value. 2 is kind of a unit of accounts, and the 3rd is the actual kind of money, which you use to pay for goods and services. And circles is meant to be the money. So basically the circular money, that money that's meant to be used and settled, not a store of value per se. Obviously you can keep circles for some time, but it's not going to give you generational wealth. You shouldn't keep them for your grandkids. So basically it's kind of more money in the sense that it should lubricate an economy rather than that it should create enormous fortunes.
Now, I find this an extremely ambitious project that tries to address an extremely important issue in the world at large. But if I think about the practicalities, I go to a shop and I want to buy something, and there's a clerk in the shop that accepts my Sebastian circles. That guy will probably look at me and saying, "Hey, Sebastian, this is monopoly money. Why would I, give you any goods for this, monopoly money?" What's your answer to that person?
Any money is monopoly money. So basically the thing is, money is worth something because you believe that it'll be worth something later. And I think this trust in Circles, obviously it has to be earned, right? I think you can't just say this is magic internet money and now it works. But I mean, there's different ways to kind of jumpstart this. I mean, what's definitely gone I mean, this is really cynical to say, but I mean, now with ChatGPT, we will see youth layoffs at a massive scale. So basically all the people working in call centers now, they'll be out of a job in 3 months. That's going to be terrible. There'll be so many communities that will be ravaged by mass unemployment, and kind of we have to find a way to kind of distribute resources differently. Because I mean, if you look at the world as a whole, we don't have a resources problem, we have a distribution problem. And I think Circles kind of tries to tackle this. And one of the ways in which this can be kickstarted is by actually using Circles as co-payment. So basically allowing merchants to say, look, I'll accept 30% of this in Circles, but the rest you'll have to pay in fiat. So basically, I mean, sometimes merchants, depending on what they sell, right? So sometimes they give like 30% discount. So even if they were to say, okay, at worst, this circle is worth 0, I will have given a 30% discount, but I'll still have made 70% on the sale, right? So there's definitely ways to kickstart this, and I think a lot of people are unhappy implicitly or explicitly with the economic system that currently prevails. So, I mean, is this a long shot? Absolutely. Is it worth shooting? Also, absolutely. So, yeah. And I think with blockchain, kind of, we now have this chance to do this cross-border and in a trustless and decentralized way, because you don't want an agency kind of issuing these, right? You don't want Amazon to kind of come out with this, right? So, yeah, this is
absolutely amazing. Is that live already? And if so, like, how can I get Circles?
Yeah, absolutely. So the wallet that currently works is called Circles.garden. You need 3 people who are already in the network to initially trust you, and then you will start collecting Circles. Yeah, that's literally all there is to it. There'll be different front ends in due time, but you can already buy some things for it.
That would have been my next question. Like, what can I get for my magic Circles?
Yeah, so basically there's Circles Marketplace. You can get, so basically it's localized mostly in Berlin. So you can get food, you can get massages, you can get therapy, all the kind of things you may want. You can get like second-hand garments and like little plant seedlings and all kinds of things. Yeah, and obviously, hopefully this will grow. There's about to be a 1,500 people trial in Bali with 750 merchants, where people who are not crypto natives will be given this as a tool to kind of lubricate their economy. And we will obviously share learnings far and wide.
Super interesting to see how that goes. I will definitely check that out. And when I'm in Berlin latest for DAppCon, I will, see what I can get for my Circles, if anyone would accept them.
No, so basically, I think you'll definitely find something you can like. It's you can get like sourdough starters and
I will do that.
Yeah, and kombucha, scoobies, and all kinds of fancy stuff.
Okay, I will check out those fancy things paid in Sebastian Circles. Now, one thing that you announced today, which I found absolutely cool, is as a last subtopic to the Circles, is a privacy solution. Like, walk us through what issue that is trying to solve. Maybe let's start with what is the problem here?
The problem is that everything is on chain, right? So basically everything is extremely transparent. And just like you don't want all your payments to be visible to anyone or visible to everyone who cares to look, this is the same for Circles, or it can be the same for Circles, right? I mean, sometimes you probably wouldn't care that much, but by and large, you don't want your financials to be on-chain. So what you can actually do is, but because it's your own circles and kind of it lives off of these trust connections, adding a privacy feature to this is enormously difficult. So
like the normal kind of Tornado Cash kind of pool, I would have a pool for my Sebastian circles, but like, okay, who's probably the most active user of those, right?
Yeah, there you go. And so what we've actually done is there's this concept of a group currency, okay? And what the group currency does is basically lets an organization register a circles address, and the organization does not draw a basic income, but you can send them circles, okay? And what they can do upon receipt of the circles is they can lock them up in a treasury and issue group currency circles for the Sebastian circles that you sent, okay? And that kind of allows people to band together to larger groups. This facilitates many things. So basically you would then say, get HOPR circles for everyone who kind of works at HOPR. And you could kind of, maybe as a company benefit, you could provide liquidity for the HOPR circles on any automated market maker you like, and that would kind of increase the acceptance of your employees' circles manyfold, because there would be guaranteed liquidity. It would be backed by many people instead of just one. It hedges the risk of anyone who kind of wants to accept those circles. So basically that's kind of, it makes the protocol work more smoothly. But what it also now allows you is to actually have a privacy pool on these humans of HOPR circles.
So basically, is it correct to say that my individual Sebastian circles that I might put into this like HOPR kind of group circle is like an underlying to this overall group?
Yes.
Okay. So basically, kind of the more of the various things is in there, like the more this overall thing is worth. Like, so the first association that I have with that one is like, it's a bit like a lending protocol, right? It's a bit like a kind of an Aave, or maybe it's actually a bit more like a maker, right? Where you have a bunch of underlyings and you issue this one kind of overlay token out of it.
Yes, only that the underlying are all of the same shape and form, namely they're all circles from different people. But yeah, it kind of begets liquidity in the same way that Make or Aave do.
Okay, now tell us what sort of privacy do you get from that? Is that a shielded pool, or what do you use there? Yeah, there's a shielded pool.
Okay. So basically it's a Tornado Nova style shielded pool that you can deposit arbitrary amounts into and withdraw to, and send within the pool and withdraw to whatever address.
So basically that gives me kind of ultimate privacy for sending these funds around. Okay, that is truly fascinating. And that is currently already live, right? Because I've seen a demo of it.
Yeah, you've seen a demo. So basically it's been live since 3 days.
Okay.
So it's super new.
You heard it here first.
It's super new. There's 0 design so far, but it works. It works, and it's super cool. So basically the very first group that we actually implemented this was humans of Gnosis. You don't actually have to be an employee or associated with the GnosisDAO in any way to actually become a human of Gnosis. Anyone can become a human of Gnosis, so you can also become humans of Gnosis. What you do is you provide liquidity against your own circles, of your own circles against a GNO, so 1 GNO worth. Then you send a message in the Gnosis forum, so forum.gnosis.io, and we will add you to the Humans of Gnosis group.
Now, practical issue. I mean, I sign up to Circles, I get my circles there, and then I have to create an AMM pool. I guess Uniswap, or which one do you
Swapper.
Use? Swapper. Okay, Swapper, all right. So on Swapper, I wait an hour. I have finally my first Sebastian circles. Like, how many Sebastian versus like how many GNO should I put there? Like, what is the?
You need to put 1 GNO, and basically then obviously it would be advisable to take as many Sebastian circles as GNO. So that would be roughly 350
Okay. So for you,
Sebastian circles.
okay. So for you, you're basically saying that these circles have a value of roughly $1. Is that your mental picture?
Yeah, they have a value of 30 cents.
Okay.
So basically, you need like 350 or so to kind of make up the 110 euros that the GNO token is currently worth, because obviously you want to deposit them at a 1-to-1 ratio, because otherwise someone will trade you, to the correct price and you lose.
Where does this number of 30 cents come from?
It's a long story. So basically, the value of that kind of, the mental value of a circle, that's kind of always been a parameter that we weren't sure about. And at some point, we decided to, instead of, I think at some point you got like 5 circles a day or 7 circles a day or 10 circles, I don't remember. And we decided to kind of have 1 per hour, and then we kind of needed to divide down the number, and this is how we kind of got there. But obviously there's no fixed peg, so there's no guaranteed exchange of your circles against anything else. So this is just a rule of thumb, and this is also how people roughly price things in the circles marketplace.
Right. Okay. So I get a few dollar worth of circles per day.
Yeah, but I mean the question is how much should that be, right? And basically how should it vary across the globe? Should it vary across the globe? And this is an open question. So basically this is also one of the things that we need the 1,500 people trial for in Bali, kind of actually play this out with regular people who kind of use this as a core pillar of their daily income, and how they use it, and how often every circle kind of goes in a circle, how often it's spent before it's before it's deflationed away. So kind of it's like, it's there's not a lot of parameters to set, but basically it's difficult to kind of set parameters initially, so kind of we set them, and we're happy to reset them if there's an issue with them, but basically you need to start somewhere.
Yeah, I really hope that there's some economists looking at this experiment and soon writing textbooks about the experimentation that's happening here, because absolutely fascinating. Great. Friederike, very final question for people who want to enter this space, like, markets in crypto not looking good. Still, many people might be inspired by what you told about academia and, your personal journey. What would you tell them at this moment? Like, stay where you are, go all into crypto. What's your recommendation to people considering taking the leap into crypto?
I think crypto is unique in that barrier to entry is really low. You just need to jump in. So basically anything that you burn for, you care about. There's probably DAO. Just seek them out, kind of get your toes wet, and I think basically see how you can add value. And in DAOs, this is always appreciated. So I think it's still easy to get a foot in the door.
See where you can create value. I think that's a great statement to end up on. Thank you so much, Friederike, for telling me all these things. I learned a lot here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and also for hosting in this very flower-heavy, awesome venue.
That is what happens when you join ETH Privacy for the very first time here out of Istanbul today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.